And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are magic rules that I'm not so sure about, actually. It's a video I decided to do because I have a channel on my Discord where we have a judge corner. People go in there and ask about different rules, interactions, and of course I try to go in there as much as I can and help out. And sometimes I'm actually a little stumped. So this is going to be, like I typically do with my magic rules videos, go over specific interactions to help people figure things out, but I'm actually not even 100% sure on some of these. So yes, I will need some help, and I know I'm going to get it. If there's one thing the Magic community is great at, it is correcting content creators in the comments of things they're wrong about. Lord knows I've gotten it enough. So let's start out with one that, again, originally I thought I knew exactly right out of the gate, but then I had to think about it a bit. So it regards Bernard Ginger Sculptor, which of course says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1 food golem artifact creature in addition to its other types and has that food ability. And one of my patrons asked, well, what if I steal someone else's creature? You have a Reigns of Power, maybe, steal a bunch of your opponent's creatures and you sacrifice them. And of course, the wording on your commander is whenever a creature you control dies. And I'm thinking, okay, well, obviously, you're controlling that creature, and when it dies, you may exile it. The problem is, and the part I'm not 100% sure about, I think I am. I'm starting out with the easiest one here, because this one I'm pretty sure I'm right about, but it does get a little confusing, because, of course, when a creature dies, it goes from battlefield to graveyard. But if you steal someone's creature and then it dies, of course, it's going to your side of the battlefield, but it's going to their graveyard. It's not going to your graveyard. That, of course, is a really important distinction. And, of course, if we go look at a card like Hoffrey Ghostforge, which originally says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit. When this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to your graveyard. And of course, the issue with the wording on the card was, what if you stole an opponent's creature? So of course, they had to errata this card, right? It has been errated so that it says, whenever this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to owner's graveyard, because you're not going to put it back in your graveyard. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to Bernard. The only interesting part here is that creature dies and then gets exiled, right? It's not getting exiled instead. So that means the creature's going from your side of the battlefield to an opponent's graveyard, and then you may exile it. So you're exiling it from their graveyard, which I guess is okay. So you should be getting the copy. I think that works. I'm pretty sure it works. Again, the only part of that wording that makes it a little bit confusing is the creature goes from your side of the battlefield to their graveyard, and then you're exiling it from their graveyard, which I guess the more I think about it, that seems okay. All right, this is an interesting one. I had a patron ask, what if I cast False Cure and copy it? So I use Twin Cast or some effect that copies a spell so that I get another resolution of that spell, right? So False Cure, black and a black instant until end of turn. Whenever a player gains life, that player loses 2 life for each 1 life gained. So what happens with a healing salve is they gain 3 life, and then this says, well, whenever that player gains life, they lose 2 life for each 1 life gained, so they will essentially end up losing 3 life instead, right? It does the opposite effect. Now, what if I've copied it, right? What if I had 2 false cures resolved on the same turn, and then my opponent cast a healing salve? What happens? I'll throw it out there to you guys. What do you think is going to happen in this situation? Are they going to lose 3 life, or are they going to lose 6 life? Now, my thought here is that indeed they will lose double the life, because this is sort of a triggered ability. I don't know if there's a specific name for this where you have a spell resolve and then it sort of puts this triggered ability sort of out into the ether that is looking for a specific thing to happen, like for example a player gaining life, because it does have whenever, right? And a whenever always means that triggered ability. Now, is this actually a triggered ability? I don't know. It's on a spell, so not really. But if you have resolved 2 false cures, they're both sitting there waiting for that scenario, at least until end of turn, for a player to gain life. So if someone casts a healing salve, both of them will say, aha, this thing happened. Now, of course, just like with the normal triggered ability, they will both trigger at the same time. They will go onto the stack in order that you choose, which shouldn't matter because they're both identical, and they will both resolve saying, okay, well, this person gained 3 life. They're going to lose 2 life for each 1 life they gain. So the first one will resolve and have them lose 6 life. So they'll go -3. And then the second one will resolve and they'll lose 6 more life. So they'll go -9. That should be how this works, I believe. It's not a replacement effect, right? That's the one part where I thought the wording could be confusing. It's kind of a triggered ability. It's not a replacement effect. You don't have instead. That's why the person is actually gaining the life, right? When you have a false cure resolve, if someone has, say, a well-lost dreams, they are still gaining the life, so they can still pay and draw cards for their well-lost dreams, despite the fact that they're actually going in the minus. So I think the answer here is, if you have a double copy of False Cure, both which have resolved, someone casts a healing salve, they'll go -9. Let me know if I'm right about that. All right, how about this question from another one of my patrons? If I cycle Yidaro Wandering Monster, then copy the cycle ability, does that mean that I cycled Yidaro twice? Like, does the copy count as Yidaro being cycled again? Wow, I was not sure about this one because, of course, cards that say this phrase on them, when you cycle this card, whatever, does that mean you have to actually activate the ability in order for it to be counted as cycling the card, right? Because of course Yidaro says, whenever you cycle Yidaro Wandering Monster, shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. If you cycle the card named Yidaro Wandering Monster 4 or more times this game, put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead. So if I have something that copies an ability, I cycle my Yidaro, I copy the cycling ability. Now, of course, when you copy an ability, you don't have to pay the activation, right? And as I noted in a rules video recently, cycling is indeed an activated ability, right? You got to look at that reminder text. It says, pay that cost, and then what the effect is that you get of it, which is usually just discard that card and then draw a card, but sometimes you get other things as well, right? With Yidaro, though, you're going to get the typical cycle payoff, which is you get to draw a card. By the way, this ability will happen first, if anyone's not sure about that, right? When you cycle your Yidaro, the activation cost is discarding your Yidaro, and then this ability will trigger when you cycle it. So it will be shuffled into your library, and then you will draw a card off of the cycling effect, so there is a chance that you will draw your Yidaro again from its own ability, which is kind of neat. However, what we're talking about here is, well, what if I copy that ability? If I copy it, of course, I will get the effect again, right? Whenever you copy an ability, you don't have to pay the activation cost. You've already done that. You're only copying the effect that you get, right? The part that comes after the colon is the effect that you get from paying that activation cost. And when I copy an ability, that's what I get again. So I will get to draw another card. But the question here is, does that count towards the I've cycled my Yidaro 4 times? My initial thinking was, no, it doesn't, because I think when something says, when you cycle this card, it includes the activation cost. So if you're not doing the activation cost part, that doesn't count towards cycling it. But I actually don't know. This one, someone's going to have to help me out with. So the question here is, if I cycle my Yidaro and copy the ability, yes, I will get 2 card draws, but is that going to count 1 cycling of my Yidaro so far this game, or does it count towards 2? Let me know in the comments if you have the absolute answer for this question. Here's a really interesting one that happened to me in a game recently. There's actually a couple that I'm going to talk about here that actually happen in games where I was stumped. I was like, I don't even know how this happens. A patron of mine has a very interesting Sakashima and Ardennes deck where they take Luxior, they put it on a planeswalker, turn it into a creature, and then they copy the creature with their Sakashima and turn their Sakashima into essentially a creature that is also a planeswalker. It's a really neat deck. They had out another card in that deck that turns planeswalkers into creatures, Spark Shaper Visionary, which very importantly only turns your planeswalker into a creature until end of turn. Then they put a Sea Dasher Octopus on it. So now we're doing Mutate and turning planeswalkers into creature all in the same deck. Certainly it is a deck that is going to make a lot of judges go crazy, but a lot of people probably already figured out what the issue might be here, and I did not know the answer. We're playing the game and I'm like, you know what? I don't even know. Sea Dasher Octopus goes onto their Tezzeret, I believe it was, which is currently a creature. Of course, you can mutate onto any non-human creature, but what happens at the end of turn, right? At the end of turn, Tezzeret turns back into just a regular old planeswalker. Is it like an aura? Because I know with auras, if I put a aura on a creature that turns back into something else, the aura falls off. Is that what happens with Mutate? I don't know. The way we ended up playing the game is that the Sea Dasher Octopus stayed on there because, of course, Mutate works a lot differently. It's supposed to like mush the cards together. Like the idea is those cards actually sort of become one. So I don't think it can fall off. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments below if you for sure know the answer to that one. Here's another really interesting one that happened happened in a game with my patrons a while back. I had an opponent with a Starfield of Nyx in play, which of course says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, but also as long as you control 5 or more enchantments. Each other non-aura enchantment you control is a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and toughness, each equal to its mana value. So of course, this turns your enchantments into creatures, and they had exactly 4 enchantments in play. And I guess in this particular scenario, it doesn't matter if they have 4 or more. The point is they're getting to 5, right? They have an enchantment entering the battlefield that is going to turn this on. It's going to be their 5th enchantment. I have another opponent with a blind obedience in play that says artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So the question is, does that enchantment, remember it's just an enchantment, it's in their graveyard, they're getting it back with that first ability, it enters the battlefield, but now it's a creature because it's now turned on the Starfield of Nyx's second ability, does it enter the battlefield tapped? My thinking was no, because it's not a creature when it enters the battlefield, turns on the Starfield of Nyx when it enters the battlefield. So by the time it does that, it is now a creature, but the blind obedience is too late to do that. I'm not exactly sure. I think we move forward with this game with the thinking that it does enter the battlefield tapped. It's a weird one. My instinct is to say it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped because it's not a creature when it leaves the graveyard, and it's a creature when it enters the battlefield, but not till it's already entered the battlefield, because of course it has to be on the battlefield in order for the Starfield of Nyx to turn on. You don't control something unless it's in play, and Starfield of Nyx says as long as you control 5 or more enchantments, then that ability turns on. So in order for that ability to turn on, I have to control those enchantments, and that enchantment actually has to be on the battlefield for that to be controlled. You see where I'm going with this, right? I could be wrong on this one. My patron was pretty adamant that I was wrong. Again, if you're a level 3 judge or you're just somebody who is familiar with this interaction, perhaps you can let me know the answer in the comments below, because I'm actually not quite sure. We all get it wrong sometimes, right? Sometimes I get it wrong on my channel. I've been playing the game for almost 30 years. I've seen lots of these interactions. I'm pretty good with these kinds of things, but sometimes you get these really fringe, interesting scenarios that you're not quite sure about. And all of these, I definitely am, I would say I'm about 80% on some of them, and I'm about 50% on some of the other ones. I'm not entirely sure. I know I always say comment below, and I'm definitely in this case saying comment below if you for sure know the rules interactions here. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.